Natasha, how can we fix a broken relationship?
That's a good question.
Welcome to Momversation on the Win-Win Women platform. Natasha and I, Reagan, are your hosts.
Again, our goal with these Momversations is to enrich your motherhood experience and to help you keep calm and mom on.
The topic of today's Momversation is Beyond Duct Tape, tools for fixing what's broken.
Yes, we'll be discussing how you might approach fixing a relationship you've been missing in your life for the first half hour. And then after that, we encourage you to stay on with us and go with us into the interactive portion where we can just chat with you as well.
You can share your input, you can ask questions. It's really the unique interactive feature of being with Win-Win Women.
Yes.
All right.
Okay, so how can we fix a broken relationship? Because I have to admit, I'm not good at that. Like, I'm really good at breaking relationships. I'm really good.
Which we talked about last
week. We talked about that last week.
Yes,
I'm really good at severing that connection, but building it back up, not so much. So how do we go about fixing them?
Well, first, I do want to take time to say kudos to you for having that ability to just cut off something that isn't healthy for you, isn't going to build you. You know, if you're going to be better off without that relationship, then that takes some guts. Right. So you're right, though. There are times when instead of ending it, we would rather fix a broken relationship because we see the potential in it. We see that and maybe it used to be a good, healthy relationship and something went wrong. And so we want to build it back up.
Right. And we did talk about that last week too. Just testing that out and seeing if it works. And if it doesn't, you have a plan. And if it does, that's what we're talking about today.
All right. So, especially since relationships, just by definition, involve more people than just yourself, right? When something is broken that has no will, I can just take duct tape and fix it. Right. But when there's another person involved, I think it's really critical to think ahead about ways to interact with that person. And
it's definitely more complicated.
Yeah. Here at Momversation, we have a set of principles that can guide our relationships. And the very first one is simply contact, like choosing to spend time with that person, talking, listening. And in the case of what might be a broken, there might be some friction there, and choosing to still go ahead with that contact, even in the midst of the friction, can be hard, but foundational. Like you gotta be spending time with each other in order to fix it. Right. So I would say having a heart-to-heart with the other person, letting them know that you feel like something's broken and finding out if they feel the same way. Right. And maybe they do, maybe they will admit too that they see that the relationship is struggling, and then finding out from both of your angles how interested you are in putting the work in to fixing it, because it's got to come from both sides. It's a two-way thing. So
yeah, those one-sided relationships, those are the ones that drain you real fast.
Oh yeah. So it takes a heart-to-heart and gauging that interest level, and it might be even more than two people. If it's a whole family, for instance, I feel like I do this with my family. I'll just sit us all down and be like, look, guys, we got some things to fix, you know? And trying to like motivate them into investing their energy, their time, and helping them feel like it's going to be worth it in the long run, I think is really helpful. So I think too, being able to see the relationship as something to work on. I know that can seem a little bit awkward, I guess. especially because sometimes we have these great relationships with people that are effortless, that are just like, oh, every time I call and chat with you, it doesn't take any thought, and we
It's
just
true.
get along. And so when there's a relationship that doesn't quite have that effortless aspect where
Work.
yes. And so, but again, you've established that it's worth it to you, that you want to fix this and you're willing to. And then I would say, you know what? Plan things, put them on the calendar.
Yeah.
Like wholesome activities that allow for bonding. So not movies. Don't just go to a bunch of movies together.
That was my entire engagement.
That's awesome. And you've lasted
still
17
here.
years. You keep watching movies
We go,
together.
Kate, no, seriously, we go to movies for date night. We just love it. We love movies.
Sounds great. Yeah. And
But I
that's bonding.
But I understand what you're saying
Yeah.
too, is like, there has to be communication between you. You literally can't just stare at each other for 3 hours.
Right.
It's like,
Right.
you have to be able to bond and communicate.
Yeah. And maybe that is what movies can do for some people, is it gives them something in common. Remember that song, Breakfast at Tiffany's? That was the one thing that we had, was we both liked that movie. That was a song. I don't know. What about Breakfast at Tiffany's?
Oh, okay, now, yes,
Yeah.
now I know. Now I know that song. I'm not
We
that
both
old.
kind of liked it.
I should say, wait, I'm not that young anymore. I do know that song.
So yeah. So yeah, make a consistent effort. Plan, do, actual activities together, bonding things.
Yeah.
And I think then too, you have to commit to being trustworthy and offering trust to the other person, even if they've damaged it in the past, which can be really hard.
Oh, definitely.
It's for one thing, it's deeply subconscious. Whether or not you trust someone is often just a feeling inside of you that you just have to like go with, And if you're in the midst of this relationship where part of you is saying, no, I don't actually trust that person. And yet that is going to be a critical part of duct taping this all back
And you
together.
can't fake that either.
Right. So I think it's bringing it up from that deep part, letting it get some air, which again, that exposure can be a very vulnerable place to be in, and vulnerability is not a comfortable thing.
No, not at all. And I feel like that is the point in the relationship. You're really going to find out, am I committed to this? Is this relationship worth saving?
Right.
Are we both going to put in the extra work? I think that could be an easy breaking point.
Yeah.
If not done with love.
With love. Yeah. Beautiful. And that is, of course, one of Mama Vate's principles too, is the concept of love. So there's just the foundational one of contact. And then next is like work, conscious effort. And these aren't necessarily in order, other than the contact part. That really does.
That has to be first. Yeah.
But also the trust and vulnerability there, which is often what was the broken thing. And we're talking about fixing that, but sometimes a better word might be healing. And healing is a gradual process. Most, I can think of stitches is a thing that happens pretty quickly, but even that has to heal once the stitches are
before
in,
they come out. And obviously this is going to take the most amount of time, I would feel like, too. You can't just attack it all at once and expect a healthy relationship to come out the other end.
Right, exactly. And I think that being conscientiously committed. So saying to yourself at the beginning of the process, it's like that saying of begin with the end in mind, but
that's
realizing that,
especially a murder mystery.
There we go.
You have to know how they died.
See, now this is really applicable. You're a professional.
To me, not to them.
Coming in handy. No, begin with the end in mind, and be willing to take whatever steps it takes to get to the end there. Because you don't do that when you're writing a book. You don't put the end at the beginning.
Some people do. I just read a book that did that, but not me.
Okay.
I'm sorry, that was just a pointless little interference, but continue.
Well, I think that having a relationship fall is similar to gravity. Gravity pulls us down, right? And it is the law of nature that is always in place. So choosing to work on a relationship is like going against gravity. Like you have to conscientiously put the steps in to that. I think of it too like a bird. Like a bird, flaps its wings and has to keep flapping in order to stay against that force of gravity.
I just read an LDS conference talk with, I believe his last name is Uchtdorf. And he was talking about how planes actually fly, is they are fighting against the forces until they get strong enough. The wings are fighting against the forces of air and gravity until it gets fast enough that they can rise above it.
Okay.
Just read that.
Rise above it. I like that phrase. Very good. And so you do have to, and you have to understand those forces in order to rise above it. And I think that maybe what might be the wind beneath the wings, so to speak, would be forgiveness and compassion. And these are some more of Mom of Eight's principles. They just provide that correct atmosphere for successful anti-gravitational pull, and really it's about coming to this acceptance that we're all imperfect. I can give the other person space to still be developing their relationship skills, right? But trusting that they're on the upward trajectory in general.
And that takes a lot of faith.
Yes, it does.
And hope.
And commitment. Conscientiously together, right? Whew. So sometimes
a lot of talking.
And it's a lot to process when you're thinking of it in terms of an actual relationship. Like I'm sure all of us have something in mind where we're like, okay, I do know what kind of relationship in my life needs fixing. And whoa, I have to interact with the person. It's so much easier to ignore them. Or, like putting these principles into action is a whole different thing than just understanding them and being able to nod and be like, oh yes, forgiveness. Oh yes.
Right. So let's talk a little bit more about that forgiveness aspect, because I know that there was a time in my life I didn't feel anybody deserved my forgiveness for what they had done to me. So I was not in a position to be able to forgive. I was still really angry at a lot of things and hurt. And I feel like it definitely takes a lot of personal growth to get to that point. Because my initial reaction when I am approaching the tail end of a broken relationship was, I did nothing wrong. Like there's a good guy in this relationship and there is a bad guy in this relationship. And I am on the good guy team and that's where I want to stay. But so the forgiveness part of it for sure is recognizing that, oh, I might have had some responsibility in the failure of this relationship to begin with. So let's talk a little bit more about that personal growth and what it takes.
That involves humility. Part of it. I think, Natasha, I love how you're able to verbalize what so many of us aren't even aware that we are thinking, but we totally are. Like that's a fact, we all are like, oh, it's not my fault. It's the other person's fault. Right. And since I can't change them, then so be it, know? I think it's a self-defense mechanism. And even though we do ultimately confess that it's not wholly accurate, but it is true that we can't control the other person's actions. We can only control our own. So when we decide together that we are going to work on fixing it, that it's worth being, we want the benefits of the relationship, even if they come with some of these awkward or uncomfortable or even painful sometimes interactions.
Yeah.
So this brings up another one of our principles, the concept of reflection and growth. So I have to be self-aware. I have to humbly acknowledge any of my behaviors that need to be adjusted in order to make the relationship stronger, more fruitful for everyone involved, not just for myself, right? It's not just how can I make this better for me, but how can I make it better for the other person? Interestingly, I think as we take on that attitude, if I were to embrace that attitude, it would actually encourage the other person to do the same thing. And so this makes me think of hair tangles. I have 5 daughters and we're always having to work out the brushing of the hair.
I just cut my daughter's hair off, so I didn't have to deal with that anymore.
Have to. Yes, I have done that several times in the past. So if I am the one taking the brush to my daughter's hair, then she just looks like nothing, like blood murder, right? But if I let her have the brush and I just am supervising that it's actually getting done, then she doesn't hardly scream at all. She'll work at it and pull at it. And I really think that's like a metaphor there to the idea of if I am discovering my own faults and I give you the chance to discover your own faults, but we know that we're working together to ultimately make those faults workable.
Yeah.
If we can overcome them, great. But the fact is, it's a gradual, very gradual process.
Yes.
And I need to be committed to my relationship with you, even with your faults, and hoping and trusting that you're working on them. And then I can kind of congratulating you when you do get to a point of progress, you know?
That's awesome.
So.
I'm actually in the middle of trying to repair a relationship in my life, which is a first for me, I'll be honest.
Oh, well, I love you for doing it.
It's hard. Yeah. It's hard. So I've been married to my husband and his family for 17 years.
They do come as a package deal?
They come as a package deal. And we do a lot of family activities together. At least once a month, we're getting together for birthday dinner because it's someone's birthday in the family. And so we all get together and we celebrate, and just for 17 years.
That's a lot.
Every time I've interacted with this one person, I've been triggered because there's behaviors in this person that remind me of a person who I'm no longer in contact with. It's my mom. We all know it's my mom. I have mommy issues.
But I love that here you are on a mommy podcast.
Right. And so there's, in my head, I have just categorized this family member as a younger version of my mother. She tends to do the same things. It's always a victim mentality.
Okay.
It's always coming up with excuses as to why she didn't follow through with things. And so those things can be triggering for me. And I got to the point that I couldn't talk to her. I built relationships with other members of the family, but not with her. And I did that for years. And, honestly, I was not proud of myself at that point. Just because I would make fun of her, like behind her back. I would say mean things like, oh, this is just all so sad.
Too embarrassed.
Yeah, so sad. But
confess it. You might have to. That's part of the process.
Mean mommy. I was the mean one. And so I guess I didn't make my feelings towards her a secret, really. And I never said anything mean directly to her face. I was just being a mean girl behind her back, and with my husband, especially. And I'm not proud of any of this, and I don't do it anymore. I promise.
Yeah.
I just don't. But it got to one point where we had changed, the entire family had changed the date of Christmas dinner to fit this one person's needs. And then she said she wasn't coming.
Oh.
And so I called her out on it, like the mean person I was then. I'm so sorry. And she sent me a message in this group, and she just said, do you know what? I'm really jealous of yours and her sister's relationship. You guys seem really close, and I don't feel that with you. So I don't feel like being put through that tonight.
Wow.
And that kind of just, well, blew up in my face.
Yeah.
And so that text message, I don't know, I don't remember if I responded to her at that point, but I know soon after, maybe a couple weeks or maybe a couple months, I was sitting in the middle of a church lesson, and the teacher asked, or no, maybe he just said, like, there's at least one person in your life that you've been mean to, that you've hurt, that you have disrespected, that you have, been the mean girl too. And I immediately thought of this person and her message to me. And it was at that point I took out my phone in the middle of class, and I apologized. I messaged her and I was just like, I'm so sorry if I've ever made you feel like an outcast, or if I've ever hurt your feelings from something that I've said or I'm done. I was like, and I promise I will never do that to you again. Because I remember what that feels like in high school and junior high. I was the victim of my own parents. Like, I remember feeling like that. And I was like, I did that to somebody else. And so I was just so ashamed of myself. And at that moment, I changed. I apologized. And to this day, I actually find myself standing up for her against the rest of the family, because they're still in those little nitpicky behaviors where it's like, well, this person, no. And I'm like, actually, maybe this is what's going on. Maybe this is what's going on. Why don't you ask her instead of just
some compassion?
Right.
Yeah.
And so she did forgive me. I was so grateful.
That's beautiful. I'm so glad.
And now it comes down to, like, for example, she just had her missionary leave. Her only daughter just left on a mission a few months ago. And she was really sad that day. Yeah. And she was having a hard time. And in our group message, like, also, why the group messages? Like, why is that a thing? They're terrible. Please don't put me in a group message. But she had sent to the group message that she was really sad. And another person in our family said, no, that's not how you should be feeling. And so I messaged her on the side, this person that I'd been having a complicated relationship over the years. And I said, you get to feel however you want to feel today. And it is okay. You don't have to listen to them. So it's little things like that I find myself doing now, rather than just joining the herd, making the
kind
quips.
Of attacking, right?
Yeah, it's, let me message her
Even
on the side.
her.
And be like, hey, I'm sorry you're feeling this way today. And so we're still in that murky middle right now.
But definitely on that upward trajectory. You're working against the gravity.
I hope so.
Yeah.
I hope so.
Yeah.
I mean, lots of other things are going on, and family dynamics change all the time. But I hope that I can keep this version of myself and our relationship going. So, and it all came from self-check-in, that self-awareness, and an apology.
Being willing to be humble. And I was thinking about the idea of who's the good guy and who's the bad guy, and how that's kind of like body odor, right? Like you often don't smell yourself. That's true. Or if there is an odor in the room, you just automatically assume it's someone else. Yeah. As opposed, and then
checking me.
The self-check and be like, oh, wait a minute.
That's awesome. So, I'm gonna use that on something. Body odor.
Well, what a powerful example you have shared, and you were humble enough to share it with us. But please, everyone, no, she's not the bad guy. But the fact is, we all have body odor every once in a while, right? Like, it is, we aren't above sometimes being the bad guy. So being able to go in and apologize. And again, that can invite the other person to recognize too, oh, so she's apologizing for this. Is there anything I need to apologize for? And it can cause a more humble interaction altogether. So, so I think a lot of times things are inadvertent. You mentioned that it was how you were treated when you were growing up. And so maybe you hadn't matured yet.
It's that learned behavior sometimes.
Yes, of being able to overcome just parroting how you were parented. Parroting.
There you go.
So yeah, and that you're being self-aware and don't want to do that anymore, I think is really critical. And it fits in with another of Mama of 8's principles of respect and love, that I personally will pursue relationships and contribute in a way where each person feels and treats the other person as an independent thinking person with valid ideas, valid emotions. The fact that you validated her emotions on that rough day.
Yeah.
Other people were like, you should be rejoicing. And she's like,
I think that's important. I don't get that enough in my life, but I am willing to do it for other people at this point, especially like the more I learned about psychology from my degree and parenting my own children.
Yeah.
Like my husband and I go head to head all the time when, you know, like my husband will say that didn't hurt. And I'm like, actually, you don't get to tell them if that hurt or not.
What's like, going on inside their body.
They get to decide. So that's definitely kind of been a revelation the past couple of years.
Yeah. That's neat that you're able to apply it in that situation. And there are a lot of situations where it's necessary to let that person feel validated, trust them with their own emotions. They have wants, they have needs, they have motives, and we've got to give them that respect, and it will allow for greater authenticity and less contention, less arguing about,
especially with politics.
There we go. I will just let you believe what you want to believe. Exactly. And I will move on with my beliefs. So yeah, less contention overall. And if there are times where we have to for some reason come to a compromise, luckily I'm not a politician, so I'm not the one having to try to come up with a compromise on all of these issues, right? But that is part of building the ability to compromise, is listening to that person, respecting what they have to say, even if I don't agree with it, but trusting that they've come to that conclusion for lots of good reasons, you know?
Well, and that's kind of one of those verbal boundaries that we set last week too, where it's okay if you don't agree with me.
Right.
I can still be calm and have a conversation with you, and we can just go our separate ways.
Yeah.
So what if we've done all of this and there's either no response from the other side, or they're not committed? What if your efforts are being thwarted?
Yeah, that can be really painful. I feel like that has happened to me in some cases, and the other person just doesn't see a need. Maybe they don't think something's broken and they're not willing, therefore, to put extra effort into it.
Or they're the good guy in their mind.
Yes, yes, exactly. And they want us to just continue to grovel. That's
when it turns toxic.
Yes, exactly. So sometimes you just have to respect their decision to not continue. And in some cases, there's still going to be interactions with that person just because of this setting, you know, like you work at the same job, or you go to the same family reunions, things like that. So I can personally just be committed to always treating them with kindness and respect.
Yeah.
But I can't hold it over their head for if they do decide they want to come be part of it. It's almost like I have to immediately forgive their rejection. So there's been this dynamic in my own life with my dad. So he left our family when I was 5. I really only saw him, interacted with him a handful of times in my teenage years. And I got married and had a couple kids, and I thought, maybe my kids would think it's fun to have a grandpa, and maybe my dad would think it's fun to have grandkids. And so I tried reaching out, and he seemed lukewarm at best about the idea, but verbally committed to, okay, I'll be a grandpa. But then the rejection continued, basically just neglect. Right. He's never been a mean person. That's just not his DNA, but very self-absorbed, and therefore unable to show interest in other people. Right. And that's been an interesting thing for my kids to be aware of and watch happen, and see that I'll reach out but not get anything in response. Right. One time he did call and say, I have to be in Utah. That's the state I live in. For some other reason, he had some kind of convention he was coming to. So can I visit? And my kids were like, what? He's gonna come visit? And I kind of just had to mentally prepare them, like, yes, I'm happy to have him. I want to offer that option for us to have a relationship. But I just need you to know the pattern over the years has been right that, there's a little interaction and then there's nothing. So I want you to enjoy it while he's visiting. By all means, enjoy him. He's a nice guy, but don't take it personal. Don't let it deflate you. Yeah. When he stops, because he will stop, and he did. Yeah. He stopped. It goes back to that respect. So you do need to respect their boundaries that they're setting, and continue to try to love and serve them anyway. And I've already decided in my head the forgiveness will be immediate. If he tries to reach out again, I will say, okay, I'm here. I won't rub it in his face that he never calls, or on my birthday, or he doesn't even know my kids' names. Like, yeah. But if he decides he'll make the effort, I'll accept it. Thank you for sharing that. We have so much in common. I got daddy issues too. We'll talk about that another time. And we are actually out of time for today. We hope you got something you needed out of today's Momversation. Hopefully, maybe even inspired you to take a look at your relationships and see if there's any that you would like to work on. And we'd love to hear if you were so inspired. You can let us know through Facebook at Momavate, or Instagram, Momavate Moms. You can also sign up for our weekly Smile newsletter at momavate.org, which follows the same theme as our Momversations every Saturday. Yeah, we include support, which is the Momversation, because we want you to come and get support here. Climb on the call and ask, share your stories with us. Yeah, we would love that. And then we also include a musical thing, inspiration, laughter, and education, all on that theme. So thank you. Thank you to our viewers. Thanks to the behind the scenes people who make all of this technology work. We're really grateful for Win-Win Women, who they make it all possible to care, connect, and collaborate. We are going to stop the recording now and start our live interaction with our viewers. If you've watched this on Roku or as a recording, be sure to check our live show, because we're awesome, every Saturday at 3 p.m. Pacific time. And and that's through the Win-Win Women.tv website. So you can participate in the second half hour and chat directly with us. And if you'd like a text reminder, please do you tell that part, because I can't. I have a hard time with it. We use an app called Remind, but it'll just send texts out to your regular phone. You don't have to have the app. So just text at Momavate to 81010. So the number you're texting is 81010, and you'll put in there the @ sign and the word Momavate, which is like the word motivate, but with an M in the middle. So, but we want to include you in our Momavate community, also known as a mom unity. So stick around and join the Momversation. Okay.